you get off the train, you were there, right there. The building's right there. So transportation, easy. Walk up a couple steps, and the bottom floor is nothing but a food court. Has all kinds of food. The general public comes in, eats food there. If residents want, they can come down and eat food there. Next floor up has physical therapy. It has an active aging center. It has childcare. It has adult daycare. It has a whole forest. And then you move another floor. You got a library. You got this. You got that. All open to the public. And then you have your apartments. We start to bubble wrap our residents because we're afraid that they'll break. And they don't break. What ends up happening is that if you bubble wrap them, they become more frail and then they break, as opposed to if you leave them unwrapped, enjoying life, getting stronger, getting out into the world. So we need to take the kid gloves off and say, hey, we're here to support you the way you would like to be supported, and it's your choice. Understanding what each person is looking for and how to help them to get that is really at the heart of a wise community development.
Senior living in America is a $1 trillion industry. And with 11,400 adults turning 65 every day, the over 65 demographic is growing at 170%. Health isn't looking better. It's getting worse. That all spells some significant challenges ahead, and challenges that you need to understand as you think about where you're going to go in your life, what your options will be, and what your plans are going to be. Who better to have a conversation with than my friend Colin Milner? Colin is CEO of the International Council on Active Aging, and like me, his attention is centered at that intersection of health and housing. Our conversation is open, straightforward, and I think it'll pose some good questions for you to think about and hopefully come up with some answers that work for you. Whether you're a consumer or you're in the industry, I think there's a lot in it for you. Good to have you here. Let's get on with the show. Colin Milner, welcome to the program. Great to be with you today.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Scott. I'm looking forward to it.
We're going to jump right in here because I think you and I are probably, of all the people in all the world in the space that we work in, are probably uniquely positioned in terms of bigger picture thinkers. I don't mean to say we're smarter than anybody in terms of where we focus is more on the big picture versus the community. And also it's that intersection of health and housing where a lot tend to be by necessity in kind of one camp or another. So generally, if you're okay with it, I think that's maybe we'll center our discussion. We haven't really designed it in any big way, and I don't think we need to because I think there's lots of places we can go. So with that, I'll kind of set it up to say active aging. It's a phrase everybody talks about and throws around. As the CEO of International Council of Active Aging, this is a term you've been familiar with for a lot longer than most of us. So give us your thoughts on active aging.
Well, so much so actually that when we first launched and we did a Google search, there was very few people actually searching the term active aging. Today, there's a few billion. So the term active aging for us really is about being engaged in life. Being engaged in all areas of life, no matter what your functional capacity, your income, or your desire, is remaining engaged in areas such as physical activity, in areas such as cognitive health, spiritual well-being, emotional health, environmental, really looking at the person as a whole or yourself as a whole and figuring out how do I remain engaged in all these areas? Because what we know is not being engaged is the first step towards a lot of other problems that start coming into play as you begin to spiral downwards.
And I think you hit on something that I do as well, and I talk about it in the context of balance, but There's all these things that you need to, but you want to juggle, but we all do. And so one of the frustrations I hear from my adult students is, there's so many specialists out there, but how do I put them together? And I think that's again a place where you and I spend time is you gotta work them all. You don't get to just choose one or two, right?
Well, you do, and the reality is that sometimes you're probably doing some more and better than others. Like physical activity versus focusing on your cognitive health. But they're all interconnected. So if you're doing physical activity, you're still working on your cognitive health. And I think a lot of times people think, well, if I'm not really focused over here, but I'm over here, I'm missing something. And if you're doing the right things, they're all interconnected anyway.
Yeah, and I think that's what I find is once you get an understanding of what you're doing here is helping three other things that you didn't realize, that becomes to me really motivating to say, I'm getting more out of this than I thought, right?
And it's not a scoreboard. I'm not sitting there going, okay, today I have to do two things for my cognition. Today I have to do one thing for my physical health. Today I have to do, it's just as you are engaging all of those areas, and some are more intentional than others.
Yeah, it's a little, and maybe listening to that, people will understand. It's why when someone asks me, well, what should I do? It's not really a list of things. I can't give you a prescription of what to do. I can give you some ideas, but you got to, essentially, there's many things that you want to do and keep it in flow, right? Like almost like a seasonal thing. You kind of talk about it'll move through time, through different stages in life and even through the seasons of a year. Life's changing all the time, and you just want to keep moving with it and hopefully guiding it to where you want to go.
Absolutely. I think we as parents, or at least my parents, knew best, and that was they kicked me out of the house. Not out of the house, but I would be sitting around on the couch and they'd kick you out and you'd have to go do something. Well, what did you do? You'd go where the other guys were and you'd pick up and you'd play football, hockey. You'd maybe go for a walk. You'd go in the park and enjoy, what that has to offer. We don't do that anymore. Whether we're young or older, uh, there's a little bit too much sitting around.
I was thinking of something before we came on, and I didn't ask you this, but so where did you grow up?
I grew up in Kingston, Jamaica.
Right. And at what age did you emigrate from Jamaica to Canada? Or was
Yes.
there another stop in between?
No, I immigrated to Canada initially when I was a baby and got really, really sick. So the doctor suggested to go back to Jamaica because of the warmth. I got everything, measles, mumps, you name it, chickenpox, all in a very
Well,
short.
you know those Canadians, right?
Oh, I know. And then I came back up when I was 13.
Okay.
And since then, I have been like a nomad. I've been to 57 different countries. I spend now half my time throughout the year in Palm Springs, enjoying life and working still, and the other half traveling, experiencing what our members at our association, the International Council in Active Aging, does. And it is a very rewarding life at this moment.
Yeah, uh, it's, I want to talk a little bit more about that, but let me just kind of circle back because I think one of the other places that's interesting, and I certainly know it impacts my view on the world, particularly here in the US, is having grown up in Canada, seeing our societal or cultural approach to aging and some of the differences, again, both around health and particularly on housing. We'll talk a little bit more about housing maybe in a minute. But that's really helped me because there are safeguards in the Canadian system I understood. I didn't, I saw at the time when we talked about it, and I see that are missing in the U.S. And I think that's part of what's some of the challenges that we face here that we're not going to fix overnight, right? But so let me kind of get into some other things here with you because longevity is another buzzword and health span. and lifespan. So those are all words you and I kind of hear all the time from people. And so maybe you can kind of give your thoughts on what those words mean to you.
Well, that's a great question because I've been thinking about that a lot lately. We have our lifespan, which is, the length of life that we can expect to live. And our potential lifespan, right now at least, the oldest person in the world was, from my understanding, Jean Clement, who was from Paris and lived to 122. A lot of people are talking about the ability to live to 150 or longer. We're not there yet. Very few people live to 122. Once we start seeing a lot of people living to 100, then we can start celebrating the thought of a much longer life. But to my knowledge, right now, 122 is the top of the hill. What influences how we get there is our health span, and that is the period of time that we spend our life in good health. The sad part about all of that is that we spend in North America in general about 12.5 years in ill health. Our goal is to shrink that so that one day you wake up, you go play pickleball, maybe you drop dead in the pickleball court. And that will be a hallelujah moment because we haven't spent 8 or 9 years in ill health becoming a pincushion for the medical system, which is what my father did. And longevity is more of a term that is loosely used to describe how long we are going to live. Today, that term is actually being reshaped to also describe how well we live. It's really combining the two of those into one. I'm not sure if it's being used correctly, but that is the way many people are beginning to utilize the term. Longevity movement, longevity economy, longevity clinics, longevity communities, uh, longevity science. So that's really how the three intertwine. If you do anything, you want to make sure that you have a long lifespan that is supported with a very long health span.
When I ask my class, when I start a new session of classes with my older adults, older being 50, uh,
Hang on, say that again.
the the question I always ask is, what do you care about, longevity or health span? And without exception, it's health span, right? So I think there's a recognition, but I think what you and I would probably caution people is it's a much bigger challenge than most people realize in terms of it's more prevalent because as soon as health span goes away, those people disappear from our radar. We don't see them. We only see healthy people and we're out and around, even, regardless, they could be 100 years old and they're out and around. Well, we think that's great. But for every one person doing that, there's a number that are essentially shut-ins that are not able to do that we just don't have awareness of. Talk to me a little bit about ICAA, and so it's your baby. You brought this to life in, was it 2001? Is that right?
2001, right after 9/11. I
Yeah.
invested all my retirement funds in the organization to launch it because there was a need and I was waiting for somebody else to do it and no one did it. So I just got frustrated and said, I'm going to do it. And I was losing money in the stock market. So I figured if I'm going to lose money, I might as well lose it on myself. So that was how it all started.
Cool. And so today, in terms of, I know when I looked at it a few years ago when I first really became aware of it, how many members do you have today?
So we use a figure of 10,000. We float in and out. It could be 10,500, 10,700, but we keep it at around 10,000 because it could be 9,300, 9,500. They come and they go. And they are in 56 countries around the world, 56, 57 countries around the world. And they span the gamut from government to groups like Canyon Ranch, to what our main focus is and our main membership group is, and that is senior living, senior housing, depending on how you want to call it. Some people still call it retirement communities. That term's a little bit dated.
Great segue, because that's, I think, the other place I wanted to spend some time, to give people a sense of, when we talk senior living, what all that includes, because it's like everything, right? People that, they have one or two data points and they assume that's what it is. So give me a flavor of, because when I was running, or president of the National Aging in Place Council, like, people thought, well, all you did was service people living in their private homes. No, essentially our people go out into all sorts of communities, the same ones you and I are going to talk about now. So maybe you can give me a flavor of kind of maybe what the traditional ones look like today, and then we can talk about some of the new ideas and what's coming, right away, or all the way into some of the, call them the longevity resorts on
Yeah.
the up and comers.
So traditionally, the communities have been broken out around people's functional levels. The higher your function is, the you would lean more towards an active adult community of 55 plus, as it's called. Um, if you are older, but you're still active, you would then move into an independent living community. Or if you are active, but you want the security of having all levels of care around you, you may want to move into a CCRC or life plan community, which takes you all the way through the continuum. And those individuals are all relatively healthy individuals that are moving into those communities. Um, Once you start having some challenges, then you may move into with activities of daily living. You may like bathing, by the way, or doing laundry, things like that. You would move into somewhere like an assisted living community. So your functional capacity is starting to diminish. You may be getting a little bit frailer. And then if you are becoming more dependent, you would then either stay in assisted living or move towards skilled nursing. And that has been your traditional trajectory within the senior housing market. Today, though, it's changing. Today, you have co-housing, you have intergenerational communities, you have tiny communities, you have pocket neighborhoods, you have university-based communities, you have luxury communities, you have all these different types of communities that are opening up now, longevity communities, wellness communities. They all have one thing in common, though, and that is, how can I help you to live a better quality of life for as long as you can, which is where, coming back to our conversation about Healthspan. If they don't have that as a primary focus, I certainly wouldn't move in, because that means they don't have your best interest at heart.
Right. I think it's maybe a good place for us to talk about, words, and we keep throwing words out because I think it's the labels everyone puts on it that gets them tripped up, because they don't really understand what they are. So one of the ones, that we hear is independence. We want to preserve independence, and another one I know that you and I key in on is identity.
Yes.
Talk about those two words and what people really should understand, what those mean, and the different values of them.
So I think when you talk about independence, you talk about autonomy, being able to do the things you want to do, when you want to do them, and with who you want to do them. That is our ideal scenario. Matter of fact, so much so that Ken Dykewall and Edward Jones, in their research, identified that 90% of individuals over the age of 50 identify healthy aging as that description, or that description as healthy aging. So I think, if we look at anything, as how do I have an autonomous life? And part of that is my lifestyle. And where I go for that has a big impact on that. The environment that is there to support it, the programs that are there to support it. So, first, independence is, I think, at our very souls, our essence. We are meant to be independent, and when we lose that, if you look at Sarah Harper of Oxford University, she believes that we become old, which, by the way, we're all trying to figure out when old is. Her definition is that we become old when we are no longer able to do the things we want to do, when we want to do them, and with who we want to do them. And we lose that independence, and we now rely on somebody else for care. Now, at the heart of all of this is you need to see yourself as an independent person. You need to see yourself as someone who is engaged in society. And that's where our identity comes in. You know, we talk about behavior change, but it's my contention that before you can even focus on changing your behaviors to improve your health and well-being, you need to change your identity. Because if you still see yourself as someone who is not, exercising, someone who isn't doing all of these things, no matter how much I tell you to do those or to change your behaviors, you're probably not going to do them. So identity is at the core of this. And if my identity is as an independent individual, then I will do what I need to do, hopefully, to remain that way. If my identity is that I want to rely on everybody else to do stuff for me, then I may view moving into an assisted living community with less issues than if I see myself as independent. And lastly, think about our identity. It is a fluid state that happens from our birth, and we're constantly changing our identity through our life. If we have a spouse and our spouse passes on, our identity changes. If we lose our job, our identity changes. If we are bankrupt, our identity changes. All of these different things impact our identity.
Yeah, it's a thank you for that. That I think is going to cause people to pause and think, because it's the one thing that gets lost in the discussion, which is really at the core of who we are at any stage in life. And circling back to particularly identity, when we look at senior living options, one of the things that commonly happens is the system. What's the one thing it's after? Our identity, right? Because it wants to make us a number in whatever. It's just, that's the way systems work. And so part of, I think, thinking about whatever senior living opportunities we're considering, really stop and think about what impact is that going to have on identity. I had an example of what would be one of the professes to be one of the leading innovative architect firms for senior living in North America. Designer had been doing this for 40 years and put her mother into a community. And 6 months in, she said, I thought I knew what I was doing. And I realized I'd been designing for the wrong solution. Or I didn't understand what I was doing, because what happened was in the community was her mother went in and she was needing to be there, but at the same time, it's not a 0 or 1. It's not, you don't need, skilled nursing typically from going straight from home. But she couldn't do anything. So everything was provided for her, which sounds good, right? So where I think you would probably see this, I certainly do, is adult children are having to make a decision with their parents.
Yes.
When it gets to that point. And in the spirit of wanting to preserve and be safe, well, I want to make sure that everything's done for us so I can sleep at night because I live on the other side of the country. And in the course of doing that, essentially strip everything away from what that person's need is to get up out of bed. Basic chores suddenly become a luxury when you could and want to do them. It sounds good on a vacation, right? That's where I kind of say that's where I'm interested in the resort living versus the practical aspects of daily living. And I don't know how much you see that, but that's one of the areas that I have seen quite a bit where the industry is not as well tuned in, I think, And so maybe I'll ask you this question. If I, yeah, no matter what we're talking about, there are challenges, and clearly in senior living, there are many. If I made one observation of senior living, I would say they haven't done a great job of understanding the real values of their clients. Their values are more generally resort driven, convenience driven. Those aren't what you and I typically value as a human being. Is that what are your thoughts on that statement?
I think that there's some really solid fact in there, and that is that I want to be able to feel like I'm contributing. I want to be able to do my garden if I had a garden before, instead of having somebody doing my gardening for me. Now, there are other people who will go, I've been cutting that damn lawn for the last 40 years, and I don't want to cut another lawn in my life. So there is no one size fits all. But to your point, understanding what each person is looking for and how to help them to get that is really at the heart of a wise community development. Luxury living, some people will want that, some people won't. For me, as an example, I'd love to have the amenities because I will use them. Other people will go, well, why am I paying for these amenities? Because I'm not going to use any of them. So, hopefully, what you're attracting, if you are providing those amenities, is people who are actually going to utilize them. And then you have a vibrant community built around your pickleball or, some of these other things. I think that where fall flat is when we try and do too much, when we take away somebody's ability to live their life on their own terms, coming back to autonomous living. And, a lot of times, especially when you get into somewhere like an assisted living community or skilled nursing, we start to bubble wrap our residents because we're afraid that they'll break. And they don't break. What ends up happening is that if you bubble wrap them, they become more frail and then they break, as opposed to if you leave them unwrapped, enjoying life, getting stronger, getting out into the world. So we need to take the kid gloves off and say, hey, we're here to support you the way you would like to be supported, and it's your choice.
Yeah, I think there's again when others are kind of feeling liable for the outcomes of you, the individual, it's a very difficult situation. But the reality is, at any point in life, but particularly when we get older, stuff's going to happen, right? The idea, we don't like the idea that falls increase when we get older, but they do. It's a reality. So to imagine that no one is ever going to have a fall and you design for that, yes, we could, but who would want to live that life, right? That's the bubble wrap solution versus, okay, how do we mitigate the frequency of falls? How do we mitigate the impact of when they do fall? So all the things we talk about in kind of in health and wellness in particular, but also things around the environment so that if and when they have a fall, it won't be too frequent. It's not going to be in the bathroom when they're there alone and showering, those sort of things, right? Where we've got some reasonable measures in place. And yeah, and that's, I think, a lot of, what I hear from people, and you probably do as well, is so why don't you want to go into some kind of senior living? And that, in one way or another, is largely what I hear is they don't want people telling them how to live their life.
Yeah. If I'm living an autonomous life outside of the community, I don't want to give that up. So, really, what I want is I want to move somewhere that I can still live the life that I choose, just my surroundings have changed. And in that essence, it then becomes home instead of an institution or a facility or a community, whichever word you want to use to describe it. So I think we need to respect the fact that people are moving in, and they're all moving in for different reasons. Some are moving in by choice, some are moving in because they need the service, and some people are moving in because their families are nudging them, should we say? Uh, and others are moving in because they are being, and the term has been used for many years, institutionalized. And the common denominator amongst all of that is that they're moving in. Now, how do we make the experience for each of those individuals the experience that they would like to have as opposed to the experience we want you to have? Because what you may want me to have is something completely different than what I want to have.
And that's difficult when you do what one salesperson in the industry calls the feature puking tour.
It is the library tour. These are all the things that we have and all the books and all the amenities, but I haven't taken one moment to find out what you are actually interested in.
Yeah, yeah, it's a, and I do think so. As I look at it, there are multiple reasons why. There's no, just like there's lots of reasons why people move in, or why they think. And well, so I'll go back to let me go back to where I started earlier around understanding the values. I don't seek to lay blame on anybody or point fingers, because I think there's lots of people that want to do that. When I say the industry doesn't build for what people value, part of the reason why is people don't know what they value. Because when we talk about what you value in senior living, those aren't things that people typically talk about in their circles with friends and family. They only realize it once it's been stripped away. Right? And now we're in a much more difficult situation of, do I adapt? Am I an adaptable person? Going back is almost never an option. And so part of it, I clearly put on the responsibility of you, the adult, here, is to give some time to think about, goes back to what we talked about earlier, that identity piece is, who are you? What do you identify yourself as? What do you really value when you strip away everything else, right? You got to take them through that exercise to find out, oh, these are so if cutting the grass has some deep, significant meaning because their grandfather cut the grass until he was 104, and I just, as a kid, said I wanted to be just like him. It doesn't matter, whether you even think it's rational. These are some of the things that if you don't know going into these communities and you can't articulate it, your chance of success is significantly impacted, right?
Very much so. Finding out what people do and what brings them a sense of joy. Everybody talks about purpose and that we need this big, hairy, audacious purpose. But I think most of us have no clue what our big, hairy, audacious purpose is. But we want to be purposeful with what we do. We want to feel like we are having an impact, whether it is on a kid's life, whether it is on our spouse, whether it is, donating something to a homeless shelter, whatever it may be. I think if we can figure out what helps us to feel being purposeful by moving into this community, and what is our identity and who do we want to be around. You may move into an Amish community and realize pretty soon that your Ferrari is not looked at very well by all those with buggies, as an example. I mean, come on. So, understanding who your neighbors are is also at the heart of all of this.
Yeah, and that's where I see, even looking at 55 plus communities, right, would be an example of what I kind of try to guide people to is, be careful about choosing to live with people in the same socioeconomic class as you, that look like you, that are all basically the same age as you. While that's easy to assimilate, from a sustainability standpoint, you may quickly find there's not much interest because it's the things that people surprise you, the different experiences that people and where they come from, that often I think is the color and flavor of life that, and who do you want to mentor, right? I think you touched on that one. If you're all the same age and you don't have different, different cultural backgrounds, different age demographics, it's kind of kind of pretty boring. I would
Well,
imagine.
if you think about it, years ago, Disney opened a community called Celebration in Florida. And many people talked about it being like the Stepford Wives, where everybody, you had the white picket fence and there wasn't much variation in the look of things, in the people that were living there, and so forth. Now, I think Disney learned their lesson and they divested of that. And now Disney's opening up a property in just outside of Palm Springs in Rancho Mirage. And I've had the good fortune of going down there and looking at what they're doing. They're building a community that, number one, is intergenerational. They have a 55 plus uh, community in the middle of that intergenerational community. They have the amenities that are intergenerational. They are building it very differently than what they built their first community. So, did they learn their lesson, or is that just a fluke? That I don't know. But I think that we need to understand that change is happening. And the old way of building and uh, programming, if I may use that term, a senior living community is on its way out. And we're looking for more ways to interact with our kids. We're looking for more ways to interact with our friends. We're looking at, there's one stat that sticks in my mind every single time I speak, and that is that 25% of our member communities are open to the public so that people can come in, they can work out in their fitness club, and by the way, they charge for that. They can come in and eat in the restaurants, they can use the spa services, and they charge for those. So not only is it a good way of bringing in and combining generations, but it's also a great revenue generator in an area that many communities have not looked at generating revenue or connections from.
Right. If So my view on that is the reason why, well, there's the what I'll call the communities that really are designed to serve the wealthy, right, which are not interested in interacting with the community at large. They want what they want and they want their privacy. And so that's fine. That's an easy group to service because they can essentially afford whatever they want. And
Yes.
whether it's an a la carte service. And I think where you're talking to is where my interest is particular is what we would describe broadly as the middle market. Yeah, I don't have endless funds, and it might even be a more cost-effective option for me to go into a senior living community than what I was living at previously. But it really is, it's a different model for the operators because having been in multinational companies, our drive in a big corporation is we want to own the value chain for lots of reasons, not simply from an economic or an income standpoint, but we want to be able to control that experience, right? You kind of look when like going to the Disney theme park. Disney wants to have control on what your experience is. And so you would expect them to do exactly what they did with senior living. But like most, they didn't really understand what the experience people were looking for on a long-term basis versus a short-term basis. So that for me is a really, really interesting area, and where I'm seeing the biggest barrier is what I would describe as innovation. And again, having been in the biggest innovation company on the planet, innovation is its own skill set, right? So it's not simply what the world would think of. I was exchanging with Bob Crane recently on this was continuous improvement versus innovation. These are vastly different. The world knows continuous improvement. I can make incremental improvements. Innovation is a far more challenging exercise, but given the surge of seniors coming in, we just, in my mind, we don't have time for continuous improvement. We have to innovate.
Well, this is a little bit of innovation here. So, how do we figure out that kind of innovation in senior living? And I would say that one of our challenges is that It's hard to innovate if you continuously look at the market and your property through an old lens. You have to put on a completely new lens. I don't think that Steve Jobs went out and did focus groups to create his phone. My understanding is that it was created through their vision of something new, something completely different. And I think that we need that in this area. Now, are things like Jimmy Buffett's communities, Margaritaville, is that innovation? That's difference. Is the Disney properties, is that going to be innovative? We'll wait and see. One of the things that they're doing on their property is building these huge amenity centers. The one in Rancho Mission Viejo has its own beach. The interesting part is it's in the middle of the valley, which also happens to be the windiest part of the valley. So we're going to have to see how the wind and the sand coexist. I think they may have a little challenge there unless they weigh down the sand somehow.
Put some stone pebble on it. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. But what they're doing is they're charging you moving into the community. You got to pay, I think it's like $13,000 a year to be able to use the amenities. And part of the thing is that they got to pay back what they're building because they're building some really incredible amenities for the residents. So innovation also costs. You have a group like Rancho Mission Viejo that created a very innovative multi-generational pocket generation or pocket neighborhoods for older adults in this huge, huge property. And I was involved in their initial process for a year and what they did and what they went through and how they rethought and rethought and rethought things ahead of time instead of after the fact. But most people don't do that. Most people don't have the resources to do that. And most people don't have the will to do that. They will build and then say, okay, well, if we need to make a change, we make a change. So, to your point, innovation is something that I think is lacking not just in senior living, in general. And the other part of that is if I was to build a senior living community today, I would look at all of my common spaces like a tiny home and figure out how I make them as flexible as possible so that I can completely change them on the go depending on what I need, instead of all of a sudden waking up 5, 6, 7 years later saying, I have a dated community and I can't adapt to the new needs of my residents.
Yeah. I think that's again, of places you and I spend mind time, that's one of them. So one of the ones I do is to think through like a greenfield community, like you're talking about here, is if I could do anything I want, well, it has to be, probably at some kind of scale because you need a revenue source for everything that you're doing. And so you've got to be, you, so if you're a small community, you're going to have limited options, right? The bigger you are, like you could say the villages would be the example of the biggest one. It's its own type of community. I'm not saying that's the answer, but it has different challenges and different opportunities than some of the small operators, right?
Very much so. And, people also don't understand, some of the costs behind things. And they go, well, why don't I have this? I'll give you a very simple rudimentary example. And that is, we put on a conference every year. And, I hear from folks, which, by the way, we do provide lunch now, but we used to hear, well, how come you don't provide lunch? Well, at the price that we're charging, and lunch being $85 to $90 a person, two lunches, that's 180. And if you're paying 360, that basically is 50% of the cost just going to your two lunches, let alone anything else. But people have no clue. They just think, okay, McDonald's is $5, so your lunch fee should be nothing. And I think that example works also within communities where sometimes we expect all of these things and don't realize that there's a cost associated to them and that in some cases we're going to have to pay for them.
Well, I think, yeah, and it circles back to really, I think you and I are probably of the same mindset around if we were going to design a community today, we would we would have essentially, I think, a seamless interface with the community, the larger community around us,
Yes.
because that's a revenue source for us, but it's also a capital source for us, right? Because if you're we'll just use an example of an elder law attorney. If you're a physiotherapist, if you run a small medical clinic, all these things that you're going to have maybe 50% of your clients within walking distance of your office. That's a pretty good place to be by, when you say location for any office, right? If that's your target market. So that's a pretty good matchup with what we would want. And at the same time, as a company, if I don't want to run your service, right? I shouldn't want to, I do, that's in the bigger ones, but ideally you tell me what space you need. Like you said, here's the shell, and I'm going to lease it to you. Or there's other companies that will come in and build like a little mini mall that'll provide all. And your agreement says you're going to make sure you have these 5 services offered all the time. And number of ways to do it that the industry is not used to thinking and looking at it that way.
No, Kampong Admiralty in Singapore is an affordable housing project. And when you go there, you get off the train and you are there, right there. The building's right there. So transportation, easy. I walk up a couple steps and the bottom floor is nothing but a food court. Has all kinds of food accessible, charged. The general public comes in, eats food there. If residents want, they can come down and eat food there. Next floor up has physical therapy. It has a active adult, active aging center. It has childcare. It has adult daycare. It has a whole forest in the building itself for the next 2 floors because it's outdoors. So you have all of that, and then you move another floor. You got a library. You got this. You got that. All open to the public. And then you have your apartments that are then closed off and available to residents. But everything that you would want is right there available. But it's also open to the public. So it is run like a business, but your residences are your residences.
Yeah, it's and it's so obvious when you stop and think about it because if you looked at where are these, I'll say we talk about the private communities, the ones that are thriving. In essence, that's what's in it, or we'd say a small town community where these services are all close and convenient, not necessarily by intentional design, but they worked out that way. And that's what I look at it to say. In the exercise I take people through. So here's a greenfield project. So take away the constraints of where you live today because old McDonald's farm isn't down the road anymore. All the reasons people are quickly say, you can't do that here, can't do that here. You've got to get them away from that and then say, well, there's a lot of things about that type of living that we could probably do 80% of them here with
Yeah.
some relatively modest upgrades and give you a whole lot without you having to really move anywhere, perhaps. But yeah, it takes this kind of thinking that it's work, right? To take people through that exercise and let go of the things that that we naturally fear might threaten our identity.
Well, and governments nowadays are looking at how do I build a 15-minute city where everything is available to me within 15 minutes of walking. Or a 5-minute city is the new thing that they're looking at focusing on. How do I build neighborhoods where everything is available within 5 minutes of walking or getting in a car and going to? Well, really, senior living communities fit that description. Everything is available within 5 minutes of walking if we wish and if we choose to build that. Sometimes we don't. And, it becomes challenging for the people who actually have low function to actually get out and go to the grocery store and do these things. Now, a lot of properties have a store built into it, with some of the basic things that you need day in, day out. They have restaurants, they have wellness centers, they have spas, and some have nothing. So when you are the consumer, you have to, number one, figure out where do I want to live? What do I want to have access to? Who do I want to be around? What kind of experience do I want to have? And if something goes south, am I still able to live in this community? And beyond that, then it becomes how do you get the most out of that experience?
Right, and it's a difficult place for people to go sometimes to step back and really do that self-assessment,
Oh, sure.
right, and be honest with themselves. But in my experience, people will get there. It's the starting. They tend to avoid the conversation, kind of going back to where we started earlier. These are, when you get into it, are great conversations because but you're going to bring family and friends into the conversation. Otherwise, it's a conversation going on with yourself.
Well, and the question is whose family? With the nuclear family now, with so many different generations, which kids? Is it your kids? Is it your grandkids or your great grandkids that are going to, over time, influence where you move? Do you want to be close to your kids, or do you want to be close to your great grandkids? There's so many factors that come into it. And, the one factor that I think you always want to consider is how am I going to live my best quality of life? What is the setting that is going to provide that? Who or what do I need to be close to that is going to provide that? And at the end of the day, can I afford that?
Well, that leads into what we'll kind of close out as the last topic. I think part of our challenge when we talk about, I'll say, the middle market is people's expectations of housing. In my view, our expectations are too high. We're setting ourselves up for failure. It kind of goes back to, what do you value? You think you value your private cottage with your own yard and things, but in reality, very few can afford that in senior living, even in private community. And so that's something that, again, going back to the values discussion, isn't really what people value, but they think they do. And so that's why we see the builders building them that way for a relatively few number of people who can afford it versus many more who could afford and more an apartment type living like you talked about. But you have to experience it, and that would be the ideal way is go out and experience these things. A lot of them you can test drive, come and move in for a week or two to visit and decide if you like it before you make a final commitment. Because those, from a long-term sustainability standpoint, all the things you and I have talked about, if you can't afford it, you're in the wrong place. You've got to be looking at something you can afford.
And it's not just affording it now, it's
Right.
affording it 10, 15 years from now, because odds are, if you're doing the things that we've talked about, you are maybe going to outlive your money. So think about where you will move that you're not going to outlive your money.
Right. And so we know that the cost of essentially everything associated with health and housing for seniors has been going up at about 50% higher than the rate of inflation. I was talking about this pre the pandemic. The pandemic just created another surge on top of that. And so yeah, so from a standpoint of, you're going to have to be realistic in what you want, and once you resolve that, then start to look at it. I think they're great options. I just don't see that we're really building for them, and people are reluctant to try them because they don't know, because they haven't tested it. And so those to me are the part of the gaps that somehow we've got to help people and get over, and help the builders make more available.
So if you want to live longer and not go broke, the best way of doing that is to stay healthy.
Absolutely.
The cost of care is immense, whether it is bringing someone into your home or moving into a community that provides care. So the best care is to take care of yourself.
Right. So the numbers, because I'm a numbers guy. So in retirement, 50% of all the money you spend will be on health and housing. All the other things that you worry about, yeah, they're important, but none more than health and housing. And exactly as you point out, housing costs will track your health, right? And so if health goes inversely, so as health goes down, housing costs go up.
And I'll give you one simple example, and that is Nico Pronk at Health Partners a few years ago did some research, and he showed that if you're 50 years or older, and if you walk 90 minutes a week, you would take $2,100 off the cost of your healthcare bill on average. Not very complicated. Who wouldn't mind that?
Right. Right. Yeah. It's not that hard. So Colin, I know you need to run. Thank you so much for this. And, I want to express my thanks for you being one of the pioneers in this space, because a lot of people have come in behind you, really as a result of the work that you've been doing over the last probably 25 years directly in this area. And in many ways, it's really just beginning.
It truly is, and thank you for that, Scott. And kudos to you with your book. Hopefully, everybody gets a copy of that. And I'm looking forward to what the next 25 are.
Well, let's check in and see how we're doing in the next little while. Okay.
Yeah, well, I'll be 90. No big deal.
Let's see. That makes me something beyond that. Okay. Take good care, sir. Thanks you so much.
All right. Thanks. I appreciate it.
Hope you enjoyed today's show. Great to have you part of our over 10,000 strong Healthspan community. Remember to subscribe if you'd like to learn about our upcoming shows. And as always, make sure you provide some feedback, whether that's a thumbs up or a comment, a question. They're all welcome. If you'd like to subscribe to our quarterly newsletter, you can do that at wealthspan.com. We're always looking for show ideas, or maybe you think you'd like to be a guest. Again, please reach out to book a motivational talk or inquire about our leadership workshops. Email me at info@wealthspan.com. Until next time, stay engaged, stay curious, and take good care of you and those in your care.